All right, thanks for watching this next video. I think this is, what are we up to? 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Yeah, so this goes into a bit more detail about the languaging focus, just because the last one was sort of long, just explaining this to this far. So I wanted to give some examples of what it actually looks and feels like. So at a site level, this is sort of really kind of rubber hits the road type stuff of how I recommend organizations can shift the actual language. So on the kind of left hand side there, is I guess a more traditional view of anchoring to safety and hazards. Is it safe? That's unsafe. Only do it if it's safe. Be safe. Don't take any risks. I know I've got the word risk in there, but it's a negative statement. Does everyone understand? And I guess I'm not saying that's wrong, but it just gives an outcome that you get, and I think I've banged on long enough about safety and suggesting that, one of the challenges for safety is that it's kind of a bit broken. Like, we anchor to safety as harm. We treat it like it's a binary outcome, safe or unsafe. Whereas, if we can shift towards more this risk focus, you can see in the green box there, these are just lots of different examples of shifting our questioning, asking different questions that get a different thinking. So there's questions that just generally anchor to risk over safety. So I would teach organizations never to say, don't do it if it's unsafe, or is it safe, or whatever. And we say, is it risky? How do you feel about the risk? That's too risky. It's a typo in there. That's an unacceptable risk for us. So even this was a conversation I had last week where you've got a contractor doing some work and they've been literally doing it that way forever. The company is like, that's unacceptable. Well, that's unsafe is how traditionally it would be said. But of course the contractor is saying it's worked all right every other time. I've never been hurt. And so then what we'd say is the response is, fair enough, but that's too risky for us. Now that's different from saying it's unsafe. I mean, unsafe is the outcome, risk is the process, but the language shifts a little bit. Instead of saying, I can't, do that work for you, it's not safe. It's like, I can't do that work, it's too risky. And it shifts to the conversation and the thinking that's the first part of it, not the second part. Questions that focus on risk and support chronic unease. So asking questions like, what could still go wrong and what could really hurt us today? What do we need to focus on? How could fallibility catch us out? So I suggest that organizations talk about fallibility and not error. I think human error is really negatively framed or primed. It's got quite a negative affect bias with it. So I just say stay away from human error, partly because as soon as when workers hear human error, I think the next thing they're expecting is they're going to get in trouble. So I just say stay away from it. And you could talk about, okay, let's talk about fallibility. How do we manage fallibility, or where could fallibility show up? And it could be in overload. It could be, yes, we might be actually, under pressure, right? But it's under pressure and then we want to rush. So rushing's not a failure. Rushing's an outcome of something we're trying to get done. We could be flooded, that type of stuff. Could autopilot be an issue? So could we end up running on heuristics? Could we miss a change? So these are all much more positive ways of saying paying attention, or don't get complacent. The questions that prime risk intelligence thinking. So questions that prime confidence. How confident are we? You can see the list there. And when we say not do we have the right mix of people, but how confident are we? It makes people evaluate their answer in a different way, and they think about what they know and don't know, or they think about ideal versus current. It's just such a different way of thinking. And you can ask them as a percent, and then you can be like, why'd you, tell me more about that. How did you get that 80%? Also, they shouldn't be at 100, right? So, are we right to go? Yeah. How confident are we're right to go? Or probably 95%. All right. Is that where we're at for today? But I would argue you never want to be 100%. That's not how risk works, right? And then questions that prioritize curiosity and learning. So they're my classic ones. Talk me through, tell me about, walk me through, that style of question. They are an open-ended question, but I do think that just asking an open question, like what are the hazards? That's an open question, but it's still such an old school question. Like it anchors so much to sort of that traditional filling out a form. If I say, what could hurt us today and what do we need to keep an eye on today? What could go wrong today and what do we need to focus on today? They're open questions, but they're different. So not all open questions are the same. And then when I say that one, talk me through, tell me about, walk me through, they prompt a storytelling response, and you'll learn much more about what people are thinking in that way. Just talk me through the main steps of the job. Just walk me through how you're going to do setup. And you'll learn, especially where the question for leaders is, how confident am I we're on the same page? Not do you understand? So I'd teach leaders, never ask, does everyone understand? Because, the question is, will people say they understand even when they don't? And the answer is yes, partly because they're primed. They think that's the answer you want. Also because it's the easiest way out. Also because they might think they know and they don't. Like, there's a whole range of reasons why you should not trust that answer. So I say, don't ask it. Instead, think, how confident am I we're on the right page? Okay, well, how do I satisfy that? Okay, let's make sure we're on the same page. Just talk me through the first thing you're going to do. These, are these risk questions? Are they safety questions? Are they human questions? I don't know. They're just questions that prime and engage with uncertainty and accept there isn't always an answer, but they build up our confidence that we're on the right road. At a more organisational level, this is less practical, this information here, but it's more of a giving the intent of sort of how I see this world between embracing risk and what that feels like versus probably where most organisations are at, which is managing risk. And I've also contrasted this by saying I think that the other end of embracing is rejecting risk down the other end there. So I think typically for me, most organisations are in that managing risk phase, and that is sort of probably what a lot of traditional safety would feel like. I'm just being aware. I know I'm obviously suggesting there's something beyond it, but that is how we've got to where we are. It's given us a great foundation. It is, a lot about, but I guess I'm going to pick apart some things in there. I still see, yes, there's consultation, but it's still a lot of explaining and telling, not genuine consultation at times. There's a spectrum here, right? I think there's still a tendency that this, believing that uncertainty and hazards can be managed through enough planning, because it's back when things go wrong, it's like, oh, well, we didn't know enough, we didn't plan enough, we didn't have enough forms. We still try and prevent human error and fix things. So fixing still, not learning, but an anchor to fix. Could you ever do an investigation and not have a corrective action, right? If you're like, oh, I don't know about that, that means there's still an anchor to fixing, which believes that we just need to manage risk and keep managing it forever. We want to control people, so systems are still often seen as more of a controlling mechanism, telling people how to be safe rather than supporting risk thinking in there. The location of the power is in systems, so if something goes wrong, you get this classic, if it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. At an extreme end, this is shit like when there's an incident, people are signing bits, they're getting people to sign on the registers to sort of prove they were there afterwards, or you got tick and flick going on, which shows the power of the system. That's what's happening there. At the rejecting risk end, which I don't sort of work with too many organisations at this end, but I was just trying to think about what does the contrast look like, and it is at the heart, this avoiding risk, which is a kind of how I see with this zero harm. Like, if you think zero's achievable, you have to deny that there's uncertainty built into the world. You have to deny risk and uncertainty. You have to think that you can just control everything, but then we end up, the bit that's most uncertain and hardest to control is people, which is why we end up blaming people. We deny and we treat every event as bad, as opposed to going, well, there's uncertainty baked into the world, so things are going to go wrong. How do we build in resilience? Not a rejection of it there. A lot of output measurements. Now, I know some very structured organisations that might drift down that rejecting risk end might have positive performance indicators, but they're probably still used as KPIs, so as driving behaviour, not measuring safety. Subtle difference in there. Systems are typically a punishment thing, not even a controlling thing. Very autocratic approach, treating contractors as children, that sort of stuff. So for me, I'm not hard and fast on this, but this is sort of more how I see the embracing risk sort of feel. So leaders and organisations are starting to maybe use some of this language and embrace some of these ideas that uncertainty is part of how we do our business. You can't predict everything. I actually think too that this thinking helps better integrate with other parts of the organisation. So other risk areas like commercial risk, financial risk, even environment to some degree, but particularly commercial and money, I think, reputation. Sort of, is risk good or bad? And they'll be like, well, risk, it's both, right? Whereas in safety, there's a definite prime that risk is bad. Whereas risk is it's both opportunity and potential threat. So I think embracing risk, even in safety, and shifting towards the idea that you can never get 100%, that there's always some opportunity and some potential threat, is actually more aligned with other risk areas. And it's a way to minimize that situation where sometimes safety gets pushed a bit out of broad strategic planning, because it's like, well, you guys just do the compliance part and we'll look after the rest of the business. Like, safety is not often seen as a strategic advantage. So, normally it's like, what's our LTIFR? Anyway. So yeah, focus on risk, accepting human fallibility. It's expected that unexpected events are expected, ironically. And so that's a learning opportunity. Use more narrative or storytelling response. Proper skin in the game, proper engagement, which does represent some challenges in some IR environments, but is just a more reliable outcome in the long term. You see systems as thinking and communication tools. I actually think you shift away from the word hazard. I just wonder, once you've got to a certain level, that anchoring to hazards no longer provides the benefit of kind of going, oh, what's the hazard, what's the risk? I think once you get to a certain level, you can just be, what's the risk, and focus on that. To simplify, that's one of the simplified things. Systems are thinking tools, that you try and put the power at the front line, at the people. Focus on reliability for strategic planning, not knee-jerk reactions and sort of correction and fixes. You think much more longer term in there, and much more shared responsibility. So that's kind of my view on what it can look and feel like, organisationally, and both at a site level. And sort of thought I'd do this as a separate video because of the length of the last one, but it's more the practical element of the shift in language and focus. So that is it for this one, and then the final video will go into more detail about the implementation process. Thanks.